Hello and welcome to this EPRS Policy Roundtable. As you know, our event today will focus on the midterm review of the von der Leyen Commission, the European Commission under the leadership of Ursula von der Leyen. It comes very timely, as you know, as we are reaching very soon 2.5 years in office of the Commission. It's a pleasure for me and a privilege to introduce this key event. And it is somewhat, as our loyal audience may notice, a continuation of a prolongation of a recent event that we had, where we focused on Jacques Delors and his successors. And I remember that then one of the panelists, I believe it was Martin Westlake, said, it's too early. We can't really yet assess the von der Leyen Commission. I believe now, with 2.5 years approaching, the moment is more mature to undergo a midterm analysis. And indeed, my colleagues very kindly have looked very diligently into the 6 policy priorities and have produced an impressive document where you can read and see exactly the progress that has been achieved. And of course, this publication, this EPRS publication, is at the outset of today's event. It would have been business as usual. It would have been a review we had foreseen anyway, something we would have done. We did 5 years ago, but sadly, nothing is normal, of course, in these days. And everything is sadly impacted, of course, by the aggressive war on the Ukraine, the aggressive war raging on European territory. One think tank wrote in 2019 about Ms. von der Leyen's bumpy road to become the EC president. Who would have predicted then that this global turmoil was around the corner? It is often said that presidencies are not so much steered by ambitions and agendas, but by events, by the unforeseen, to paraphrase Harold Macmillan. And we know that events, the unexpected happens, whatever the plan is, however well we have thought through the next steps. So the real stress test actually occurs, the real stress test for leaders and their organization is the responses that are given to these events. I think one thing can be predicted today, and this is that the von der Leyen Commission will be assessed on which answers have been given to this unprecedented number of unforeseen elements, and of course the numerous unforeseen consequences that follow from those onwards, affecting meanwhile all EU policies. But let's today positively look on progress achieved, and I think we have here positive news. And what I'm pleased to announce is that we will first hear reflections from Vice President Šimecká. Many thanks for being with us once more. Then my dear colleague and Director of the Members Research Service, Etienne Bassot, will present the EPRS study on the midterm review. And this is followed by a high-level roundtable discussion, which my colleague Micaela Del Monte, head of the Citizens Policies Unit, will lead, and she will also kindly introduce our distinguished guests and speakers. Mr. Šimecká, you don't really need an introduction, but let me say 2 or 3 sentences. You joined the European Parliament as a member of the Renew Party in mid-2019. You're one of its vice presidents since January 22. You serve, amongst others, on the Civil Liberties, Justice and Home Affairs Committee. You were previously a senior researcher, despite your young age. You were also an advisor to the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Czech Republic, and you worked as a journalist, amongst others, for the Financial Times, and you hold degrees from Oxford University. Thank you for your time. Thank you for joining us today, and the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Yutan. Thanks for inviting me. Again, it's a delight as I've been an academic in my previous life, so obviously very close. So the work of the research service is very close to my heart, and as you said, I mean, this is a very, very timely stock-taking exercise, and I'm glad that we have the publication, and I encourage everyone to read it, and I'm glad that we're going to have this discussion about its findings. Now, I think you were absolutely right to say that this commission or its legacy will be defined by how it responds to events. And I remember that back in 2019, when Ursula von der Leyen took office, the one adjective that she attached to her commission was that it's going to be a geopolitical commission. Now, at the time, people were applauding that ambition, but now, again, it's the events that have forced the von der Leyen Commission to be geopolitical, regardless of where it wanted to be at the outset or not, because it's now a reality with the Russian aggression in Ukraine, and it made us discover a whole new dimension to the European Union, that of being touched by an armed conflict, just as the pandemic have forced us to discover a new dimension to the European Union, that of procuring and distributing vaccines. Now we have another tragic event that has forced us to think and look anew at what the EU can and should do. Now, it was basically immediately from the start of this legislature that the Commission was kind of forced to divert its attention from what was the original plans, not just the Commission, but also the Parliament. Immediately after we had the COVID crisis, and then of course the economic repercussions of the COVID crisis, and now we have war and a refugee crisis on top of that, and an economic crisis in the form of inflation, rising prices, and uncertainty as to the future of our energy. Of course, with the priority being getting rid of Russian hydrocarbons. This is another area which I assume at the start the Commission was of course considering and making plans for that, but now it all has to be done rather quickly. But regardless of events, or not regardless, but in conjunction with events, I think it's good to compare where the original priorities of the von der Leyen Commission are at this midterm review, and this is the work that has been done by the EPRS, basically inviting all of us to look at not just how we have reacted to these 7 challenges, but also how have we fared on the challenges and on the priorities that we have set for ourselves, and the Commission has set for itself. Now, on the reactionary part, I think, or at least this is my impression, and also this has been my sense of how voters feel, that when it comes to the economic recovery, or to the pandemic recovery, and also to the current war in Ukraine, the EU has performed better than expected, and led by of course the von der Leyen Commission, especially when it comes to kind of unity and speed of response. I've read somewhere on Twitter, I think it was the former Finnish Prime Minister who wrote that it took 4 years for the EU to address the Eurozone crisis, and it took 4 months to come up with the recovery package with the RRF, and it took the EU 4 days to come up with a prompt and united response to the Russian aggression. So at least when it comes to speed and unity, there's definitely is improvement. I think the voters are appreciating that, and they may fret about the EU and the Commission, and that things are slow and often detached from reality. But people can see that when it's a real emergency, the EU and its institutions and its member states can react quickly, jointly, and take even steps which have perhaps been unprecedented, or which nobody had thought that the EU would be capable of taking. So that's I think the good side of it. Now, when we look at at where we are when it comes to the 6 priorities, it also shows, and here I lean on the EPR study, it also shows that the legislative work is largely on track, despite the fact that we had to change priorities, despite the kind of the obvious disruption and to also the normal policy process. So the headline is that out of over 500 initiatives foreshadowed by the Commission, more than half have been submitted. Of these submitted proposals, almost one half has already been adopted, which makes more or less 1/4 of the Commission plan proposal now have become applicable law in the European Union. So that's a fairly solid record given the circumstances. But of course, if we consider the work that still needs to be done in the legislative track, we see that the things that are ongoing in the pipeline are proceeding quite normally, and many of them are close to adoption. I will then let Etienne present the exact figures, and of course you'll find more of it and more comprehensive coverage in the publication. But just to flag some of the issues, of course, the highest number of initiatives planned were for the European Green Deal. Here again, this is an issue where events have intervened, and I touched upon that, of course, the consequences of Russian war for our energy, and the need for a principled and for a principled stand that is in line with the Green Deal. Here, events have intervened, but I think they have highlighted, even more so the need for a Green Deal. But of course, it has become trickier in many respects, because people have to divert energy and political capital to deal with the crisis, and of course because the prices are so high. But it seems, and the EPRS study makes it clear that many of the Green Deal initiatives are on track and are close to being delivered. And here I should say that the Parliament stands fully behind that. Now, as for the third priority, that is the economy, an economy that works for people, the Commission has been faster. Almost 1/3 of the initiatives have been adopted, which again is perhaps not so surprising, given the need after the pandemic or even during the pandemic to speed up the recovery and provide swift and concrete answers to the hardships posed by lockdowns and the pandemic as a whole. Now, as for the remaining priorities, there's still a lot of work that remains to be done. Between 1/3 and half of the proposals in the remaining priorities remain to be submitted, in particular in the area Europe fit for the digital age, in promoting our European way of life, and a new push for democracy. So it's a mixed bag, leaning more toward the positive. I should say, as now on behalf of kind of myself and my institution and my political group, that we would like to see one area where perhaps the European Parliament itself should be more active and more demanding is precisely a new push for democracy. And I know that of course, we have adopted the rule of law conditionality, and there has been a democracy action plan, and there is in the pipeline hopefully a Media Freedom Act. I say this as the Parliament's rapporteur for rule of law mechanism a couple of years back, and someone who takes this issue very seriously and believes that if we give up on European values and rule of law, it would be the beginning of the end of everything we do in the EU. So here I should say that I will encourage the Commission to be even more active, and I think the Parliament stands here to help and support the Commission, and notably, of course, vis-a-vis Hungary, but not only Hungary, also more systematically. Now, looking at the future, or at the second half of the von der Leyen Commission, here, of course, in the wake of the Russian war, it's clear to everyone that we cannot go on with business as usual. Of course, the legislation that is in the pipelines for the priorities needs to be delivered, but the EU needs change, and it's now not just the European Parliament saying that. It needs bold change, and it's not just the European Parliament saying that, but also our citizens through the Conference on the Future of Europe. We had citizens panels, working groups, and the conference plenary. There's been many ideas, many proposals for change. And what we see actually is that the European public demands and wants a more cohesive, sharper, smarter, and more united European Union, which I think is good. That when the Commission and when specifically member states decide to take that step, they can rest assured that the European citizens are backing them and are in fact asking for change. They are asking for a Europe that is easier for them to understand, close to them. But they're also asking for Europe that in some areas has more competences. And I think COVID and our dealings with COVID on the European stage, on the European level, has been particularly instructive in this case. And they certainly want a more robust EU on the international scene. They really want a geopolitical commission and Europe after the war, but even before that. And they want a more social and green Europe. So in addition to what's already in the pipeline, I think these are the issues that the von der Leyen Commission need to think about strategically, and all of us in the remainder of this term. Now, just to close, I would really like to thank the EPRS for this work. It's I think for everybody trying to understand and have a deeper appreciation of what the European institutions do. I think this is the source. Of course, we in the European Parliament will be continuing to hold President von der Leyen and her Commission to account. We already had that first question time debate with her last Strasbourg. She herself gave some ideas of what she will focus on in the future. She mentioned scrutiny. And for us, she mentioned that the Parliament's role as the institution to provide scrutiny and transparency and to push for democracy is appreciated and acknowledged by her. We will continue to do that job as parliamentarians in the only institutions that is directly elected. And with that, I would like to thank everyone and thank the panelists and wish you a fruitful debate. Unfortunately, I will have to leave for another meeting, but I'm very grateful to be able to be a part of this and wish you good luck.
Thank you very much, Vice President, for your introduction and for taking us through your appreciation of the work of the Commission, but also indirectly to the work of the EPRS. Thank you. Good afternoon and welcome to the panelists on my side, and also welcome to our online audience in Brussels and beyond. I will present the work of the EPRS in this analysis. It's something that we do twice a year, and we have done it since the Juncker Commission, and we do it generally in the spring and also just at the time of the State of the Union. As I said, in a revised version twice in the year. And this one specifically coincides with the midterm of the European Commission. I would like to pick up on what Vice President Šimečka said at the end of his intervention. You mentioned at the end of your presentation the debate of the midterm of the Commission that took place during the last session of the European Parliament in Strasbourg. And this question time was interrupted for 12 years, actually, and Vice President Metsola, on the basis of some work that had been conducted in the focus group, decided to reinstall this question time with the President of the Commission. And such a session is the essence of the democratic oversight, where the President of the executive branch of government is accountable in front of the members of the Parliament. But the activity of the Commission and the records of the other institutions taken collectively are not easy to track. So, and I think this is an understatement. So the purpose of this biannual study is precisely to track the activity of the Commission, to analyze it, and to put it together in an accessible and understandable manner, and therefore contribute to make the activities of the Commission transparent and trackable. So as I said, we started this 5 years ago under the Juncker Commission, and it's the 10th time that we have produced this analysis. And we have also learned throughout this process to improve the way we present these achievements. So I'd like to structure my presentation in 3 parts. First, to say a few words on the methodology, how we have conducted this research. Second, what are the findings about the 6 priorities? 6 priorities that haven't changed despite 3 crises: Brexit, coronavirus, and now the war. And then third, on the takeaways, I will make some personal remarks. So first, on the methodology. The way we count includes the following. It includes promises resulting from the priorities as they are presented at the beginning of the term in the inauguration speech. It includes also the promises that are made in the State of the Union, especially the letter of intent, and also the Commission work program on a rolling basis. So I mentioned this because, if you like, it's a moving target. Every year there are new elements that are sort of promised by the Commission. So we track these promises, the announcement, if you like. Then in the way we assess the way things are moving forward among the institutions, we have agreed that we would consider that proposal is blocked if a certain institution that should act doesn't act for more than 9 months. We include also not only legislation, but strategies and programs. I think it's important. And we include also the demands of the Parliament, the legislative initiative reports. I explain this methodology because my colleague from the Commission, Michael Wimmer, will have different figures, but it's because we have these different methodologies, and I think it's important to be transparent about the different approaches. They are just different, and I think it's important to have this very clearly explained. So second, what are the findings about the 6 priorities? And I would like to share with you a single slide, and I will like to ask my colleague to show it. Here we have. So you see here the von der Leyen 6 priorities as they were announced at the beginning of the term: a European Green Deal, a Europe fit for the digital age, an economy that works for people, a stronger Europe in the world, promoting our European way of life, a new push for European democracy. And the 504 proposals that have been announced, they are not announced only at the beginning of the term, as I said, because it's a rolling exercise. They might have been announced since, especially considering the fact that we have encountered some crises. So with a focus on each of the 6 priorities, our assessment shows how the Commission is performing at different stages of announcing, tabling formally the proposals, and then it's followed by the 3 institutions' progress in negotiating, and finally adopting legislation. And you have the figures there. Legislation adopted is 135 out of 504 at midterm. Important to signal, as I said already, and as the Vice President said, the 6 priorities have formally not changed it. So neither the coronavirus crisis nor the recent war have added new priority or reordered the 6 existing priorities. But the initiatives resulting from the coronavirus crisis have been included in the existing priorities. For the initiative resulting from the response to the war Putin launched against Ukraine, the same. Some of them have been included in the priority, a stronger Europe in the world. For example, this is the case for the activation of the peace facility. But there are also proposals that have been included in the Green Deal, especially the ones that are relating to energy. Concerning the response to the COVID crisis, they have been included, most of them, in an economy that works for people. So what about these 6 priorities? The European Green Deal ranks highest in the number of initiatives planned, 125, so very high ambition, but the Commission has tabled less than half of them, or 45%, leading to only 1/5 being adopted by the co-legislators, so far 20%. The third priority, an economy that works for people, they had a bit less proposals at the less promises at the beginning, announced at the beginning, only 101, but then the Commission has been faster, or the institutions collectively have been faster. More initiatives have been tabled, 68%, and the highest number of initiatives are adopted under this chapter, 32%, a third. The urgent need to recover from the economic consequences of the pandemic explains this result, and that's why the third priority has taken this position in terms of initiatives planned, tabled, and adopted. Then we have a stronger Europe in the world, an area with relatively few initiatives, legislative initiatives by definition, and by contrast with the majority of the Commission's priorities, with over 3 in 4, 78% initiatives that have already been tabled. So less announced at the beginning, but a relatively fast start of the procedures. A fair amount of work remains to be done for the other remaining 3 priorities, 38% for a Europe fit for the digital age, 39% for promoting our European way of life, and 49% for a new push for democracy. And this latter priority comes lowest in terms of number of initiatives announced, 55, as neither Conference on the Future of Europe, which is expected to come to a close this spring, nor, and that was mentioned by the Vice President, however important, upholding EU values, especially fundamental rights and the rule of law, requires such proposal to proceed. So now I would like, and that's my third and last part, to look at a few takeaways of this work, and these remarks go beyond the study itself. First of all, crises, I think, lead to more centralization in the way decisions are taken. It's something we already could see in a recent event that we organized on the role of the President of the Commission since the law, something that has been mentioned by Jutta at the beginning of our event. More centralization within the Commission, possibly also more centralization within the Parliament for some measures that very courageously President Sassoli had to take. But we see also during a crisis a risk of strengthening the executives, national governments, Commission versus Parliament and European Parliament because of the urgency, because of practical reasons. So I think it's essential to maintain the rights of the Parliament, the scrutiny rights of the Parliament, even in times of crisis, quite important point. Another point I would like to mention is that we are studying today the role of the Commission, but I'd like also to mention the role of the European Council, because the European Council, I think, had a prominent role in the response to both coronavirus and Russian war crisis. Pushed by shock, pushed by crisis, the European Council took a strong role also in the response. Then you can see there is a phase that is a bit of surprise, and then the reaction that was very typical with the coronavirus crisis, where the reaction came really in July after the crisis has broken out in February. Then another element that has been mentioned by the Vice President at the beginning of his intervention, the Geopolitical Commission. It was an ambition from the beginning of the mandate, but it has materialized very strongly and probably and certainly beyond most people's expectations. And finally, and we are all aware about this debate, sovereignty or strategic autonomy, so European sovereignty or strategic autonomy, something that was pushed at various levels, but also notably by the French presidency. And what we can see, what is very clear is that there is a strong complementarity between what we classically call in our jargon in the European Parliament, external policies and internal policies. We see a very strong intertraining, military capabilities, but energy, regulatory power, and so on and so forth. And our gold category, internal and external, are really fading in this discussion. I leave it there. Many thanks for your attention, and I'm very much looking for the discussion and handing over to our moderator, Michaela. Over to you, Michaela.
Thank you, Etienne, and good afternoon, everybody. Just let me remind you that for the audience, if they want to post any question, they can also do so via the Q&A or the chat, where we collect them at the end. You presented what is the EPRS assessment, of course, of this commission, but we are today very privileged to have someone who is working at the very heart of the commission machine, if we say so, Michael Wimmer is our next speaker and is the Director for Strategy, Better Regulation and Corporate Governance in the Secretariat General of the European Commission. Prior to that, he headed the units responsible for the MFF, Internal Market and Competitiveness, and a relation with the Coreper. And prior to that, he also worked for the Austrian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and he was the legal advisor in the Austrian Perm Rep to the EU. So he might have some different perspective, and we are very eager to listen to him. Please, Michael, the floor is yours.
Many thanks, Michaela. Many thanks for this presentation, also for the very relevant words of Vice President Šimečka. I'm not sure actually that the perspective is so different, and I would want to start by thanking you and the team for doing that kind of analysis. Etienne Bassot has said there are slight differences in the figures. That's for sure, because there are different methodologies and things like that. But that is not really what matters. What matters is the broad trend, the broad elements of analysis. And I think tracking this with all the limitations that exercise has is extremely valuable. We are doing it ourselves as well. And I think it's good that the European Parliament is doing it because we are in a very constructive dialogue with the other institutions, and I think it is appropriate and good that we are being also watched and held to our word. So that's completely okay and positive. Many comments have been made about basically the program and then the various crises that have intervened and the relationship between those two, and I will certainly want to address that. But your work is useful. The legislative train schedule, which I understand is the basis for your analysis, is very helpful and is certainly a good tool to track the various elements. I would have, in response to what has been said and to this work, maybe 3 points to make. My first point is it has been indeed mentioned quite clearly that this commission was probably more than others tested by events, by crises that had to be dealt with. And in particular, we are all, of course, looking at the COVID pandemic, but also now on the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And of course, these crises have very significantly affected the work that we are doing. And just to put this in perspective, I mean, looking at the COVID crisis as of early 2020, we had to act rather quickly. We have put in place Next Generation EU, a recovery tool that is unprecedented, with more than 800 additional billion euros of temporary resources that have been mobilized, as was said, with this reference to what Prime Minister Stubb had said, breakneck speed. We have put in place, the unemployment reinsurance scheme at the level of 100 billion euro. We have put in place HERA, the Health Emergency Preparedness and Response Authority. We have put in place, or we have done something that we hadn't done before, the whole vaccine strategy, the vaccine purchases, putting in place a separate instrument which has mobilized significant amounts of money, but also was an extreme logistical challenge. And we have, as a result of all this, today 81% of the adult EU population that is vaccinated, and I think that is these are really important elements. We had to preserve in that context the single market. We have put in place the digital COVID certificate with the cooperation, with the help of the European Parliament and the Council, ensuring that there is safe travels, and that covered quite a few countries, not just in Europe but beyond Europe. And we have taken, just in connection with the COVID crisis, around 2,800 decisions as a college, of which 1,400 state aid decisions, roughly, just to give you an order of magnitude on how this has affected us. And quite similarly, even though that obviously intervened later, the Ukraine invasion, or the Russian invasion, the Russian aggression against Ukraine, has also required us to act extremely fast and to do things that maybe we have never done before. We have put in place 5 sanction packages. We are working to put in place an energy purchase platform. We are working on Repower EU to ensure power supply for the next winter, to look at energy prices, keep them in check, decreasing dependency from Russian gas. All this is a huge effort. And we have on the protection side, we have for the first time ever activated the temporary protection directive, or has been activated. Again, this is a joint effort. We have the largest ever operation of the EU civil protection mechanism. We have huge amounts of resources mobilized under a completely new instrument, the European Peace Facility, and for areas and for things that we have never been doing before, and very much in line with this ambition of having a geopolitical commission, a geopolitical union. So of course, our activity has been extremely influenced and affected by this. And that leads me to the second question. I think it has been, or to the second point that I want to convey, because it was quite clear also in the interventions, also in the analysis, that there is an analysis to be had about the relationship between these crises and the political priorities that the Commission, that President von der Leyen has set out, the 6 headline ambitions. And clearly the crises affect those. But nevertheless, we are clearly of the view that the political guidelines, the headline ambitions that we have remain valid, because first of all, they are an expression of a very strong political ambition, which is already based on big trends, on big challenges, which have now turned out in a very different, massive way, and which way within these priorities have affected the various things that we are doing. But if you look just at the European Green Deal, what it does, it allows us to reduce our dependency on fossil fuels, on imports from Russia. It creates new opportunities for businesses in a more circular way, in a less resource-intensive way, a new economic model that will also strengthen our resilience. It equips us with the tools to lead in the fight against climate change, which again is a global challenge that is very much related to these things. On the digital age, we are it's very important also from this ambition, from this perspective, to determine standards for innovative products, for applications. There are new challenges. It has been noted before that on the digital headline ambition, there are maybe less initiatives in terms of numbers. But if you look at what we are doing just now, there has been an agreement on the Digital Market Act, on the Digital Services Act. These are truly defining acts or initiatives that really are of global importance. Other examples on the digital side, enabling our industry to reduce strategic dependencies. This is what, for example, the CHIPS Act is about. And all this is, of course, very much related to these elements. Boosting our cyber resilience in a situation where we have hybrid warfare, state-driven information campaigns. This is something where actually we are very, very mobilized. And of course, on the economy side, as has been mentioned also by Etienne Bassot and also by the Vice President, of course, the recovery, the resilience, this goes to a large extent in that area as well. And many of the measures that we have been taking in response to the pandemic relate to that, but also to deal with the fallout of the Russian aggression. Single market, an important tool also in that context. And because it has been mentioned as well, I think the same is also true for the democratic system, our values, the work that is being done there. Many of the elements have been mentioned here. And for example, also if you look at tomorrow's college, there's a lot that will also emerge from that in relation to some of the points that you have been mentioning. The conference on the future of Europe has been mentioned, which is also related with that. And actually, if you look at how we have acted as the Commission in that conference, we have probably been on the forefront of those who wanted to give voice to the citizens and who have been insisting that we remain extremely connected to what the citizens actually have said. And we will have now the plenary meeting ahead, and we will then certainly also be very mobilized to follow up on this important work stream. Finally, the third point that I wanted to make is, I think it is important, in particular in a situation like that, and I think we do have that kind of situation, that there is a high degree of convergence among the key players, and in particular when we are challenged like that. And I think already at the moment of the political guidelines of the president, of the strategic agenda, of the work that the parliament has been doing, there has, thank God, been a high degree of convergence in terms of what the challenges are and where we need to go. And I think that has only become greater faced with this crisis. And I think this cooperation is extremely important on issues like health, on crisis management, recovery, on defense, on energy. On this one, the institutions really need to work hand in hand. And we have actually, I think, also in terms of the decision-making processes, of the interinstitutional processes, made good progress on that. Just if you look at the speed in which the coronavirus response initiatives have been agreed, the speed in which the EU digital COVID certificate was agreed. I mean, that was less than 3 months, even though it's a co-decision. Our recent care package has lasted 16 days in the interinstitutional process. And I think all this is super important. We are very grateful for that. And I think in particular, if we are tested like that, it's important that we have a shared perspective, that we have a shared determination to move ahead. And I think that's what's happening. And I think that makes the Geopolitical Commission, the Geopolitical Union, a reality indeed beyond probably what could have expected, focusing a lot on resilience, fostering our open strategic autonomy. These are certainly accents within these priorities, which are important. And final word, maybe, it also requires, of course, improvisation, flexibility, pragmatism on our side, even in terms of how we organize internally. I don't think it's a secret if we say we're extremely constrained in terms of resources. This is really becoming extremely challenging because every week we are getting a new responsibility. I'm only slightly exaggerating, and doing so much more with the resources we have is more and more challenging. But we are, of course, trying to organize ourselves in the best possible way. We have flexible mechanisms in the Commission. We had a coronavirus response team, also at political level, which involved Commissioners Lenarčič, Kyriakides, Johansson, Valia, and Gentiloni, just to give examples. We had a task force on the industrial scale-up of COVID-19 vaccines, which was headed by Commissioner Breton. There are also service level arrangements that are very pragmatic and very flexible. Now a freeze and seize task force. So we are trying to adjust and doing the best as we can. And I think we continue to have a joint responsibility in taking these priorities forward, in particular in a situation where we are tested as much as we are currently, and we certainly count on you and the other institutions, not just to monitor what we are doing, which is absolutely important and helpful, have a critical dialogue with us and telling us as well when we are failing what we wanted to do, but also to have this shared effort to deliver what we need to deliver. And which I think is also seen, as the Vice President has said, by our citizens as making a real difference for them.
Thank you, Michael, for your intervention. And I pick maybe one point only, and is the first one in the sense that we need also to go beyond figures. You mentioned a series of relevant initiatives. I took note of some of them, and some of which were also very relevant for the European citizens, like the COVID digital certificate. So we tend to have a short memory and just look at the most recent crisis, but indeed in the last 2 years and a half, the institution collectively have been achieved a lot. Although we should not be self-complacent, but still look at what we need to do for going ahead. And I would like now to introduce our second speaker, Mrs. Heather Grabath, who is the director of the Open Society European Policy Institute, a Brussels-based think tank. She has served as a senior advisor in the cabinet of the then European Commission for Enlargement, Olivier, and deputy director at the Center for European Reform. She had also held several positions in academia and a think tank, including the EUI and the London School of Economics. Please, Heather, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be with you today. We've heard a lot of information and some data and a lot of very helpful analysis of what's been going on in the von der Leyen Commission and the way in which the European Union has developed over the past couple of years. I'm going to take us in a slightly different direction by providing a longer term view, thinking about the role of the European Union and the way in which European integration has been affected by the priorities of this Commission. As Michael Šimečka was saying to us at the beginning, the crises, particularly COVID, and then of course the Russian invasion of Ukraine, have speeded up many things, and the speed of the response is quite remarkable, as he pointed out, especially given how much the European Union is considered to be a slow-moving machine. But there are also longer term trends which really deserve a closer look, mentioned already by Etienne and Michael. And I just want to take a slightly deeper dive into how the EU is being really pulled in a new direction of integration because of the green and the digital agendas. Now, these were priorities, of course, set at the beginning of the von der Leyen Commission in a stark contrast to the Juncker Commission that had come before. You might recall back in 2017, the Juncker Commission produced a white paper on the future of Europe, which set out the priorities for the Commission, which were not only supposed to be for Juncker, but for a much longer term. And they were very much about delivering parts of the economic agenda and demonstrating reductions in regulation at EU level. The normative and transformative roles that the EU had taken on in previous decades, for example, through enlargement policies, neighbourhood policies, were really pushed to the sidelines. Front and centre was the idea that was the single market and particularly reducing regulation. But what we've seen now, of course, is a really big initial agenda set by von der Leyen herself, both in her hearings for the job of Commission President, and then, of course, when she appointed new executive vice presidents of the Commission, who were responsible for the European Green Deal, Frans Timmermans, and for digital as well as competition policy in the shape of Margrethe Vestager. And this restructuring of the Commission and the setting of these priorities was set out very clearly as being a core agenda. Now, to an extent, both of those priorities have been overshadowed by what's happened with COVID and by Ukraine, but only to an extent. As Etienne was pointing out when looking at the bilan of the legislative agenda, a great deal of legislation has gone through thanks to the European Green Deal and the associated legislative packages, particularly Fit for 55, which is now moving. And there has been also a lot of movement, of course, on the digital agenda. Last Friday, a really quite extraordinary set of new norms were set for the world, not only for Europe, through the Digital Markets Act and the Digital Services Act. The DMA agreed on April the 13th and the Digital Services Act on April the 23rd. And what's very interesting about both the European Green Deal and the digital agenda under the DMA and the DSA is how much they are about setting norms for the long term and for the globe. They are a quite remarkable set of ambitions for the European Union, not just for this Commission, but for the longer period. Now, parts of those have been slowed down because of COVID and the point that Michael was just making about just human resources and capacities. It's not easy to get these behemoths of EU action working when you're also trying to procure vaccines and manage a health crisis and then a war on Europe's continent. This Commission has had really completely unprecedented challenges. And yet the agenda on both green and digital has trundled forward, and parts of it have in fact been accelerated. So in particular, of course, we see the way that the energy transition has been given a turbo boost by the need to get off Russian gas, oil and coal. We're expecting on either the 18th or the 23rd of May a big package called Repower EU, the second iteration of it from the Commission, which will aim, as I understand it, to reduce the European Union's dependence on Russian oil and gas by 50 billion cubic meters by the end of this year, which was amazing. That's by 1/3, because current demand is 150 billion cubic meters. That's an amazing thing to do, and then to reduce significantly in 2023, 2024 further, thanks to also another rather unprecedented thing, the build out of a new sector of the renewables industry in Europe. Of course, there are other things going on which I think all of us could be concerned about with regard to dependence on new sources of fossil fuels and so on. But overall, this is quite a remarkable push forward of this agenda, and one which affects Europe, but it also affects the rest of the world. So there's a timing issue where these are big moves, not only for this commission, but will also shape the agenda of the next commission, whether that is under Ursula von der Leyen or another president, and indeed potentially future ones after that. It's difficult to see how any commission president in the future could turn backwards on the European Green Deal when the harsh realities of climate change will be evident to everyone and becoming unfortunately fiercer over the decades to come. So the way in which the EU has taken on these, and I refer to the EU in general, because of course the Commission is setting an agenda, putting forward legislation and other forms of action, but it really is also the member states which are forming new consensuses around some of these issues, sometimes painfully, sometimes rather for the short term, but nevertheless new consensus on both digital and on climate, bit by bit, that really set norms for the EU to have a protective function of citizens as well as of economic interests, and for the transformation of global systems. So what do I mean by that? Well, the protective function is very much, you remember, of course, Macron's phrase, l'Europe qui protège, and the idea that the European Union is valuable to its citizens by providing security. And the events of the past 2.5 years have brought new forms of protective function. Obviously with COVID moving in on health, protecting health, and now increasingly in hard security. With rather more rapid moves in thinking about how the EU should move forward in security and defence matters. But it's also the protective functions of citizens in the digital world. And this is really where the DMA and the DSA have set an extraordinarily broad agenda, really with a new type of regulation aimed at curbing the power of big tech, with detailed obligations and prohibitions to the digital gatekeepers, as they're called. These are the very large companies defined by the European Union. And of course, with the Digital Services Act, these are very wide-ranging rules for many types of market actor online. It's a bit of an exaggeration, but it's been called a constitution for the internet because it updates the liability regime for internet intermediaries. It defines detailed rules on how online platforms should moderate content, and it sets up accountability mechanisms such as mandated access to platform data, and limits platforms' capacities to run certain types of targeted advertising, and so on. These are extraordinary powers that the EU has wielded to protect citizens, to protect them even from their own willingness to give consent for internet providers to take their data, to violate their privacy, and to feed them disinformation, hate speech, or at least to allow that to come through these portals. And it's remarkable that how there could be, in the final days and hours of the negotiations on the DSA agreed last Friday, there was a concerted transatlantic push for a strong final deal from US political heavyweights such as former President Obama, former Vice President, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. These are remarkable things that they should be intervening and saying, please, Europe, make this stronger. So in this way, I think this protective function of the European Union has been strengthened by these moves. And in terms of, and I think that's also the case with the European Green Deal, where the effects of climate change on citizens are going to become clearer over the next decades. Already we're seeing the way the EU has been trying and is working on protecting citizens from higher energy prices. It looks like price caps might be included, for example, in the Repower EU package. And although green groups and environmental campaigners are rightly raising big concerns about, is it a good thing to try to keep energy prices lower when consumers and industry should both be getting the message that they need to save energy, use less energy, because that's what's needed to reduce emissions and prevent a catastrophic climate change. Nevertheless, the EU is trying to do both. The EU is trying both to have the short-term relief in terms of protecting households as well as industry, and also to do some transformation for the longer term, which is also quite a remarkable thing. Then if we think about the transformation of global systems, there's no question that in the digital agenda, the DMA and the DSA have a massive impact on digital markets. And on the digital it began, I was mentioning earlier, the way that the Juncker Commission set out, it's all about creating a digital single market to avoid regulatory fragmentation and so on. But this transformative agenda is really coming into a realization now, moving away from the toxic business model of the giant tech platforms that relies on privacy invading surveillance of users for the profit of private companies, and moving more into a rules-based digital sphere that fosters technological innovation and also respects fundamental rights and values such as privacy. Similarly, the climate agenda involves setting norms that will have a global impact to limit economic activity in order to protect planetary boundaries and prevent human beings from going beyond them. Now, we've seen the EU has for decades put into place environmental protections, and of course there's been often a big struggle between environmental protection and economic interests which want to override it, with usually the economic interests winning out. But now this argument that, as von der Leyen put it, this is our growth strategy, has moved to center stage. Now, I personally would argue that growth is not really the answer, but the idea that climate action promotes European economic interests by fostering successful green companies that can sell their sustainable products and services globally is a strong one. But it does raise new challenges. And I just want to give you two challenges in particular that if this commission doesn't address it, the next commission definitely will. One is the way that very long-standing policies, which have long been very resistant to change and reform, are being challenged by these new ones, in particular agriculture. Now, we've seen the farm to fork strategy, which had a lot of far-reaching measures in it. That's been pushed back a lot by the Russian invasion of Ukraine. But the argument remains very valid that dropping the use of pesticides, reducing the use of pesticides and also fertilizers is really essential for ensuring food security in the future. So there's a big crisis about food security now in which the EU is involved. So again, a protection function, but then there's the transformative function of moving to sustainable agriculture where pollinators, for example, bees, will not be wiped out, causing future crises over food. Now, the second one is about competition policy. Now, if we think about the energy independence plan that the Commission is working on with Repower EU, that really requires a massive build out of solar panel capacity, as well as other forms of renewables, notably wind and waves. And at the moment, Europe is highly dependent on supply chains that are controlled by China. The European solar panel industry lost out to much cheaper Chinese imports of solar panels in the past decade. And the danger is that, first of all, the supply may be inadequate globally. Also, there's the problem of forced labor in Xinjiang and reports of solar panels being made with very poor human rights conditions and labor rights conditions. And there's simply the fact that supply needs to be much more secure for Europe to achieve its ambitions in terms of renewables build out. So what does that mean for competition policy? Another very long-standing and well-established policy. Well, should there be more focus on strategic sectors, as we've already seen with the CHIPS Act, and allowing them to have state support or indeed protection from foreign competition because they have a strategic importance for the transformation of the European economy? These are going to be very live debates, I would argue, certainly in the next commission, if not already starting in the second half of this one. So just to finish, I think that it's a very interesting question how the short-term urgent actions with COVID and Ukraine are going to change the EU, but let's not lose sight also of the public interest, the broad public interest motivations for green and digital policies, and the ways in which that they are expanding the scope of European integration, both in normative terms and transformative terms, in very interesting ways for scholars, but also in extremely important ways for European citizens. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather, especially bringing up the point on the normative role and whether or not the EU has become a superpower, a regulatory superpower, which is a question that has been also raised in the past. Maybe this commission has a different role, and maybe the next speaker has a point on that. But I would like now to introduce Professor Olivier Costa, who is the director and professor for European Political and Governance Study of the College of Bruges, College of Europe in Bruges. He has also had different positions. He is co-director of the Jean Monnet European Center of Excellence of Aquitaine. He has previously worked at Sciences Po in Strasbourg, Brussels, and several other universities in both sides of the Atlantic, if I may so, including Colorado, Cologne, and Washington State. And is also the editor of the European Parliament in times of EU crisis. Please, Professor, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Michaela. Thanks for the invitation to this fascinating event. And congratulations, Etienne, for the great work you are doing in monitoring all the activities of the Commission. This is very useful for maybe MEPs, citizens, but also we researchers. I've decided to do something completely different because I will not focus on the action of the von der Leyen Commission, because I knew that the previous speaker would have done that greatly, and I didn't want just to be in the repetition of what has been said, which I basically share. What I would like to do in the time which is allocated to me is to come back to, let's say, the ambiguities about the nature of the role of the President of the Commission and the ambiguities about the Commission itself and the implication for the action of the Commission. Basically, we can say that there is a clash still today between three visions of what the Commission is and what the Commission should be. Some people consider that the Commission should be an agency, an independent body composed of experts, chosen for their capacity to work in view of medium and long-term political goals that are mainly set by the treaties, a body that is not supposed to be too much impacted by the evolution of political life and the public opinion, who's supposed to be able to take sound decision regardless a bit the context. A second vision is seeing the Commission as an agent, mainly an agent of the member states, a body working under the authority of the European Council to put into practice the political objectives that are set by the European Council, a body in charge of favoring the emergence of a consensus among the member states and ensuring the smooth functioning of the EU and its policies. And then there is a third vision, which is the Commission seen as a government, a political body appointed after the European election, taking into consideration the result of those elections, supported by a political majority within the European Parliament, a body that would be fully autonomous from the European Council, because this is what the treaty is saying, and capable to implement a clear political program of its own. So those three views are not only mirroring theoretical approaches of the EU institutional system and discussion that scholars can have, because those three views are very much connected to what actors in the EU system are looking for. Some would like the Commission to remain like it was defined by the Treaty of Rome. Many people are expressing such views in the Commission, but also among the stakeholders, let's say. Some would like to see the Commission as an agent of the European Council, and obviously this is the case of people within the European Council. And some expect the Commission to become a real government accountable to the European Parliament, and this is very much the case within the European Parliament. And what is quite interesting, if you look at what Ursula von der Leyen has done since she was appointed, is that the Commission is mixing a bit the three approaches, trying to satisfy those various groups of people. Even the appointment of Ursula von der Leyen was some sort of a compromise between those three visions, and we can account for appointment as a result of those three approaches of the Commission. If we take the Commission as an agency, as it was defined in the 1950s, we can say that Ursula von der Leyen was chosen for her competences and her knowledge. For instance, compared to other candidates, some very much appreciated the fact that she had an excellent command of French and English, which is requested when you are the head of the Commission, and which was not maybe the case of all the candidates running for the position. Also, she's not a leader which is very well known by the general public, and she did not try really to develop a personal approach of her role. She has shown and proven the capacity of the Commission to serve the general interest, especially within the COVID crisis, quite a low-profile, efficiency-oriented approach of a role. Regarding people who consider the Commission as the agent of the European Council, we can also account for appointment on that in that respect, because Ursula von der Leyen was trusted and is still very much trusted by the member of the European Council. She has given guarantees about the good functioning of the EU, and she never refused to take into account the views of the European Council. In a way, she agrees with the new institutional setup in which the European Council act as a sort of collective head of state and give quite precise instructions to the Commission. And Ursula von der Leyen has never cried against the fact that the European Council is trying to lecture the Commission or give precise instruction to it. And if we remember, Ursula von der Leyen was more or less chosen by the French and German leaders, and she also accepts that the rotating presidency of the Council keeps a very important role. Then if we consider the Commission as a government, the third approach, so Ursula von der Leyen was not the Spitzenkandidat of her party. She was not even a candidate to the EP election of 2019, but she was chosen according to belonging to the EPP, because the result of the elections were like that. And she has accepted a kind of a political relation with the European Parliament. And since the election of Roberta Metsola as a new president of the European Parliament, she's even enjoying the support of a sort of a coalition within the European Parliament, which sounds very parliamentary in a way. And she has presented to the European Parliament a quite ambitious program, which was partially of her own. And she has put forward two key concepts, the Geopolitical Commission and the Green Deal. And she has very much took care of those concepts. So overall, Ursula von der Leyen has managed to play three roles at the same time and to adapt with the contrasting visions that exist regarding what the Commission should be and should do. She has built trust within the Commission among people who believe in the community method, and she has also at the same time affirmed some sort of independence and autonomy of the Commission. Still, she has proven a capacity to satisfy the European Council. She had no major fight with the European Council, and she's capable to manage the very diverse views we have in the European Council regarding how the Commission should be and should act. And finally, she has contributed to the politicization of the EU, and she has played the role of some sort of negotiation and political dialogue with the European Parliament. So it has been said that she has done much on the Green Deal, which was a key point of a program, and despite the COVID, she has also managed very nicely the COVID crisis, and took the occasion of that crisis to launch the EU Next Generation plan. And also, even on issues that were not very central to the Commission competence, if you think, for instance, as the war in Ukraine, she has been quite proactive, fighting a bit to have a role in there. So there are also some shortcomings or limitation in the action of the Commission. If we think about migration policy, if we think about defense, if we think maybe about the rule of law, because there are still things to do. But overall, it works pretty well. And even if people at national level don't understand, and I think the journalists are often quite unfair with von der Leyen because they are attached or accustomed to a more vertical approach of power, which is the case in most member states, where there is a prime minister or president capable really to steer the political action, and they, in countries especially like France or like Italy or Portugal, they don't really understand that, let's say, Belgian way of making the EU work. The tension between the three approaches of the Commission that I was mentioning at the beginning are still totally there. If we look at the current discussion within the European Parliament about possible institutional reform, if we look at the result of the Conference on the Future of Europe, we see that tension between the three approaches. And I'm pretty sure that we'll start again the whole discussion in the coming months, especially if Ursula von der Leyen intends to do a second term. Because then if we go back to our three approaches of the Commission, we have three different answers to the possibility for von der Leyen to do another term. If we consider the Commission as an agency, as it was designed originally, it would be problematic for Ursula von der Leyen to run again, because the German government should be free to appoint a candidate that would not belong to the CDU, but maybe more to the socialists or to the Greens. That would be the traditional logic of what the Commission was. In the second logic, if the Commission is considered to be an agent of the European Council, then Ursula von der Leyen could ask to be reappointed, because there may be a deal between the member states' leader, especially the French and the German, to reappoint Ursula von der Leyen, as she did a very good job in managing her task with some instruction by the European Council. And then if we take the Commission as a sort of a government, if Ursula von der Leyen wants to be reappointed, she needs to run as a Spitzenkandidat for the EP election, and she needs the EPP to win the election. So I'm pretty sure that in the year to come, we'll again have that discussion about the nature of the Commission and the nature of the role of President of the Commission. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Olivier. Maybe if we have time at the end, I would be curious to know from you whether you have noticed in the previous president of the Commission also this capacity to play with the different nature of the institution according to the circumstances. And I was also very intrigued by this particular relation with the European Council. And here gives me the opportunity to pass to our fourth speaker, because he is inter alia one very expert on the European Council, and we had some years ago the pleasure to have him in our office, and he shares, at that time he shared with us his expertise and knowledge. Is Professor Desmond Dinan, Professor of Public Policy and Jean Monnet Chair at the School of Policy, Government, International Affairs of George Mason University in Virginia. He has been visiting professor at the College of Europe in both Bruges and La Tolline, and a senior fellow at the EUI. He's also a prolific writer. Is the author of Ever Closer Union, Encyclopedia of the European Union, and the European Union in Crisis. Please, Professor Dinan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Michaela, and thank you for the invitation. It's always a pleasure to participate in an EPRS event. Etienne, congratulations on this analysis, and indeed on the series of analysis on the state of play of the Commission. As Olivier just said, these are invaluable products for researchers, not just of the Commission, but of the European Union. I use them also in my teaching. I'm an avid reader of the products of EPRS, and I peruse the website every day because so much comes out, I don't want to miss anything. What I would like to address briefly in my remarks is specifically the geopolitical aspect of this Commission, And that relates primarily to the goal of a stronger Europe in the world, but by no means exclusively, because of course, one of the points of being a geopolitical commission is to cut across the various themes, to cut across the various objectives, and to see the relevance of the geopolitical dimension in each of these. And I was struck by a sentence in the report on page 10, which said quite clearly and correctly, the response to the Ukraine crisis and other international challenges will determine the extent to which this commission has achieved its objective of being a geopolitical commission. And that's very true. And so I asked myself the counterfactual question: if we take Ukraine out of the equation, which I know we cannot, and I will come to that from a geopolitical point of view, but if we just look at the performance of the commission before Ukraine, how does it rate from a geopolitical point of view, from the point of view of achieving its objectives of being a geopolitical commission? And the first question, therefore, is how do we evaluate that? What is a geopolitical commission? What would it look like? And the way in which I would evaluate it is by seeing if there is an awareness on the part of the Commission of the strategic significance of a range of policy fields, a range of developments, and a range of events. And if there's an ability on the part of the Commission, and primarily the Commission President, to coordinate within the Commission in order to respond effectively and coherently to those developments and events across a range of policy fields. And the response might be in terms of legislative initiatives, policy paper, guidelines, and so forth. And I think a final part of the evaluation has to be the extent to which the Commission can not just coordinate internally and respond geopolitically, but how can the Commission work with other institutions, collaborate with those institutions, act perhaps as a bit of a policy entrepreneur to push those institutions, and work with them in order to address these particular geostrategic, geopolitical challenges. And I think that the record of the Commission's performance before Ukraine was mixed. In some respects, I think the Commission responded well from a geopolitical point of view. I would single out, for instance, enlargement as an area that President von der Leyen has highlighted. The development of the revised enlargement methodology, which was necessary in order to try to unblock the situation with respect to Albania and North Macedonia, for instance, was important, as indeed have been President von der Leyen's visits to the region and her involvement in the EU Western Balkans summit. And I think when it comes to the pandemic, which of course was an unanticipated event and a huge event in the first half of the life of the Commission, I think that President von der Leyen and the Commission has responded quite effectively in a geopolitical way by seeing the pandemic not just, of course, as a public health crisis, but as a multi-dimensional crisis with geopolitical implications. But then if we add into the equation the situation in Ukraine, I think we see that the Commission has acted very effectively and very successfully from a geopolitical point of view, according to the criteria that I previously outlined. Now, we've heard already the range of initiatives which the Commission has taken, and it's truly an impressive response. But I would highlight as well the important role that President von der Leyen has played in her speeches, in highlighting the way in which the Commission is approaching this particular crisis, and of course in her visit along with High Representative and Vice President Borrell to Kiev. I think that was a very important visit, a very successful visit, and I would highlight as well her speech, for instance, in the European Parliament on the 1st of March. I think that the rhetoric and the framing of the geopolitical approach to the Ukraine crisis has been very important and very successful on the part of the President. Why has President von der Leyen been so effective? I think for a number of reasons, but here I will come to exactly what Michaela was highlighting, which is my particular interest or my particular expertise in the work of the European Council. And I think what I will have to say ties into what Olivier said as well. I think in large part, President von der Leyen has been so successful in taking a geopolitical approach to the Ukraine crisis and to other crises because of her increasing effectiveness, her growing stature, and her growing influence within the European Council. I think we have seen President von der Leyen grow within the last two and a half years in the European Council as an actor in her own right. and as somebody who was very effective and increasingly influential. Now, as Olivier said, initially President von der Leyen was relatively unknown. She was something of an accidental president. She was not a lead candidate. And I think that that affected her performance early on in the European Council because she was not particularly assertive. She had to grow into the job. I think that her handling of the pandemic helped her enormously, precisely because it helped to establish her credibility and demonstrate her effectiveness, despite the initial criticism of the vaccine rollout, but in other respects, I think the Commission's role has been very effective. I think that Chancellor Merkel's departure from the European Council is helpful to President von der Leyen because President von der Leyen is no longer under the shadow, if you like, of Merkel. And I think the way in which President von der Leyen and High Representative Commission Vice President Borrell have worked together in the European Council is quite important and very different from the relationship between previous Commission presidents and previous High Reps and Vice Presidents of the Commission. Don't forget that High Representative Borrell sits in the European Council not as a principal member, but he's the only other member, certainly of the Commission, who is allowed that right. And I think that the coordination of their positions and the way in which they have been able to present positions on Ukraine has been very effective within the European Council. One thing that observers of the European Council often discuss is the institutional rivalry and sometimes the personal rivalry between the President of the Commission and the President of the European Council. And of course, there has been an element of that. We know that. But I think President von der Leyen has emerged very much in her own right as a key actor and a key player, independent of and maybe even on a level above that of the European Council President. And I think if you look at the last several meetings of the European Council, I'm including informal meetings, of course, the special Versailles meeting and the regular European Council meeting in March, I think all of which were devoted, some exclusively to Ukraine. I think that President von der Leyen's performance has been impressive. And the way, as I said, in which she has been able to frame the crisis more broadly in geopolitical terms has been very, very good. My only note of caution is this, and it comes back to the point I made at the beginning about enlargement. I mentioned the revised methodology that the Commission introduced, and there's a sentence in that which reads as follows: "There are no shortcuts to membership. It is true that the accession process today is more demanding than it has been in the past, but this is because the process of enlargement has been made more rigorous to help the countries to tackle the more difficult challenges they face in their reform efforts." And I would contrast that very clear statement in the revised methodology on accession with the difficulty that President von der Leyen has in juggling the application from Ukraine for membership. We all understand the context. We all understand the need to offer as much help and assistance to Ukraine as possible. But I think we have to understand, and President von der Leyen has to be absolutely clear on the nature of enlargement, the complexity of enlargement, and indeed the geopolitical challenge of enlargement, and not to undermine a geopolitical achievement early in her presidency, which was the revised methodology on accession, with perhaps a laxer approach to Ukraine. And with that, I'll leave it. Thank you.
Thank you, Desmond. As always, very, very remarkable idea and observation. And I would like just to, we are literally running out of time, but give the floor to my colleague, Elena Lazaro, who is the acting head of the External Policy Unit in the Member Research Service. She has been researching in global governance, security, defense, and she had also several research positions in Cambridge, London School of Economics. So please, Elena, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Michaela. I'll thank you for asking me to intervene, and I'll try to be really short in the interest of time, but also because so much has been said, which is already in my notes. Just to start, I think it's interesting that we're having this conversation a couple of days after President von der Leyen has returned from India, where the agreement to launch a Trade and Tech Council between the EU and India has just been made. The second such format following the one that was launched with the US. I think maybe looking forward, we'll be looking at that as an interesting aspect of the geopolitical commission. And this leads me to what I wanted to say initially, which I'll shrink down very much. Of course, when we think about my area, foreign policy, and as many have said, what symbolically, or rather discursively, we'll remember, I think, about this commission is two phrases. It's a geopolitical commission and the language of power, not von der Leyen's statement, but Borrell's, but still. And of course, Ukraine. I think these are the three things that we will definitely remember. But thinking about the political guidelines in 2019, at a time when this commission took over, and let's remember President Trump was still, well, Donald Trump was president of the United States. Many of the thoughts we're having today about the weaponization of the economy, geotechnological issues, were very much linked to the uncertainty of what the world will look like, not because of Russia necessarily, but also the US, Brexit, etc. So I just want to make this point that today we're talking and we're thinking Ukraine, China, Russia, but when this commission took over, it was also the US, UK, what will happen. And so I just want to make this statement. And then these political guidelines basically were in three categories, and they defined the priorities. One was trade, and it was at the time called freer and fairer trade. But as we've seen that evolve in the various initiatives, it's also had to do with a degree of open strategic autonomy in trade, avoiding the weaponization of trade, avoiding coercion. So it's also to do about resilience and autonomy. The second big group at the time was defense, security and defense, the EU as a defense actor. That's very interesting because it was one of the main baskets of things or pillars of things that were going to happen, but it's the least in everyone's mental maps, possibly the least supranational area of EU policies. And it was interesting that the Commission set security and defense as one of its key priority areas, broadly defined. And the third was making the EU a more stronger global actor. And that really, as it evolved, had to do with launching a series of strategies for partnerships, for engagement, ranging from Africa to the Indo-Pacific, obviously India, and others, and the nearer neighborhood, as has been mentioned, enlargement, the southern neighborhood, etc. So these were the three areas, and I'll say really 1 minute of words on each of those based on the work that's been carried out, including in my unit. But before I go into that, just really briefly to add to my sort of conceptual concepts about observations about this commission, just to add on to what others have said here. I think what's been interesting to watch is Heather mentioned the future commissions and how they will take this work forward. But it's also interesting that this commission, in spite of setting the pillars of something very forward-looking, has also built on the work of what was previously done. And in this area, for example, the whole defense and security developments have been in implementation of a lot that had been discussed earlier on. And the same goes with specific initiatives in trade, so the international procurement instrument, obviously the implementation of the EU-UK relationship following up on Brexit. So I think this continuity is also coming from the past and going forward. And the second, obviously very interesting observation, particularly again in this field, as many have alluded to, I think, is the evolution of this dialectic relationship between the Council and the Commission, or the European Council and the Commission, and particularly in the foreign policy priorities. What's been interesting to watch in the way we do our work methodologically is that we're moving to a situation where the proposals of strategies go both ways from the Council to the Commission. So for example, with the Indo-Pacific strategy, the Council asked the Commission to present the strategy, then it was presented, and de facto we assume it's adopted. We have a bit of an interaction between who suggests what first. There's a lot of strategies, and I think the role of Borrell, who is there, who is part of the Council meetings and the European Council meetings, is really important in this dialectic relationship between the two, and the way the strategies, particularly, not the legislation, because the legislation obviously is guided by a specific process, but we've seen this Commission really produce a lot of strategy when it comes to foreign affairs, and I think it's interesting to see how that has happened in the interinstitutional game. And obviously, what's interesting about these strategies, and I think this is an implicit priority of the Commission, is that they're very forward-looking, and we should keep in mind that this commission also put foresight as one of its priorities. So I think the integration of foresight in everything, from legislation to strategy, has been something we'll see. I see now is the time the event was actually foreseen to stop. So really 1 minute to say, in foreign policy, it has been very difficult to quantify what has happened for several reasons. These strategies are one of them. They're not legislation. The degree of supranationalism and intergovernmentalism is another. And so what we try to do is really follow what the Commission is doing on the concrete legislative initiatives and on the priorities widely defined, including the influence of the Commission and what the Council is doing, for example, in the Compass, and what the EAS did as part of that. On trade, I would say there's movement ahead with a number of very important geopolitical files, such as the anti-coercion instrument, foreign subsidies, the EU-UK trade cooperation agreement, and the international procurement. On security and defense, what's I think extremely interesting is how the Commission now is really an actor there with the Defense Fund, with its contribution in the strategic compass. So really things that bring defense, the industry, which is in a way the EU's competence, linked with this defense and security dimension, which has always been intergovernmental, and obviously the whole hybrid and cyber dimension, which is also linked to industrial issues and technological issues. And finally, the third, which is partnerships. Enlargement has been mentioned, but I think the relationship with Africa has been one where we've seen a lot of initiative, and the Commission has really been pushing on a number of ways, from trade to other areas. And then we've seen really, as I mentioned, the launch of a number of strategies, which sometimes seem too wide-ranging and too all-encompassing, but actually when one dissects them, I think we see that these strategies on the Horn of Africa, Sahel, Indo-Pacific, etc., their implementation actually ties together a lot of what comes from the area of trade, of security and defense. So the Commission, by being involved in the drafting of these strategies, is I think also pushing that internal-external dimension in there. Which brings me to my last point, which is human rights, which were mentioned by Vice President Semečka. And just to say, I think on human rights, also we're seeing what Heather said. Human rights have become about everything. They're also become about digital rights in the digital space, and human rights and trade. So all of these have now, maybe there's not explicitly human rights in foreign policy, there's one big action plan, but they are very much in the trade issues, they are very much in the digital issues, they're in the Brussels effect in many ways. And anyway, this is a point I was going to make in a longer amount of time. It's hard to make it in such a short amount of time, but just to say, I think internal, external is helping very much on this normative foreign policy dimension.
Thank you, Elena. We are already out of time, but I have been authorized by Etienne to take 5 minutes, so I will read quickly at least 2 of the questions that we have received. The first one is for Michael, and it refers to his what has changed compared to the previous commission. He mentioned the different working methods and some also constraint in terms of resources. If in your experience, do you see some difference with the previous commission, and to what extent? And the other is, first, is not really a question, but a comment. So the question is for Desmond and Olivier, is in reference to Etienne's comments that in time of crisis, we see the tendency to concentrate the power to the executive in order to respond to the challenges in a timely manner. If you see this happening also during this commission, and Desmond mentioned also the role of the European Council, and if this had happened during this commission, what are the possible drawbacks, if any? Please, Mika.
Many thanks, Mika. Well, it's a question that's not so easy to answer for an official who has been working for obviously different commissions and different commission presidents. But clearly, I think there is a change in the dynamics. There's a change in terms of what the emphasis is on, and I would rather actually pick up some of the points that, for example, Heather made. I would not. I mean, obviously, there's always an element of continuity, and Elena said at the end, yeah, sure, things like defense had an important impulse, obviously under the last commission. But I think there is a change, there is a difference, and I think many of the things that Heather said about a transformational agenda, about also a context, about how the president and how the commission operates, I think is different, and that at all level. Again, I don't want to, as an official, I don't want to characterize that, but I would not necessarily put myself in a sense of continuity, but rather emphasize. Sorry. You don't seem to hear well. There's a new dynamics. There's a strong focus on the twin transition. There's a strong focus on topics like resilience, and that is different, and that reflects, I think, also a new context. I think it has also been mentioned before that foresight. We are trying to make foresight an important part of the agenda. I think Heather was again the first one to mention that, but also Elena mentioned it. And for example, I mean, our last foresight report, strategic foresight report, we're increasingly investing in it. We are, by the way, working a lot also in the EPRS context with the European Research Service. The last foresight report was precisely about open strategic autonomy, and that has many dimensions, and many of the elements that we're doing reflects that. And also, I mean, with this emphasis on geopolitical commission, I would probably caution against having a too narrow view, because here as well, as Heather said, what we're doing in the digital area, what we're doing on the green transition, some resilience aspects, raw materials, a lot of those things, the CHIPS Act, all these are elements that are very important for the geopolitical commission. And this is not just about a strategy in terms of the Indo-Pacific. That's important, obviously. And finally, maybe also a word on the policy cycle, of course, because that has been mentioned as well in terms of the strategy versus implementing acts. It is normal that at the beginning of a term, there's a lot of emphasis on the strategy, on setting out the broad rules, and that's a bit linked also to your analysis, because we had at the beginning a lot. We had the Green Deal. We had a lot of. We had also the climate law is not a strategy, it's a law, but it is something that is a very important framework. And as we move ahead in the mandate, the emphasis is on implementing, on putting things forward, and now in the second half, certainly also a lot on negotiating with you, bringing things to fruition. And in that situation, we have to deal with of course these huge challenges that we have, and which obviously will determine our action for the foreseeable future in a quite massive way.
Thank you, Michael. Professor Desmond, Dinan?
Sorry, on the question.
Can't hear you.
Can you hear me now? Good, thank you. On the question of crisis, it depends on the crisis. It also depends on what is a crisis. I think there is a tendency in the European Union to describe events as crises, which are not really crises at all. And I noticed at the beginning of his remarks, Etienne identified 3 crises in the von der Leyen Commission, or from the von der Leyen Commission. One was Brexit, the other COVID, and the third Ukraine. I would say Brexit is not a crisis. Brexit is a challenge, and has been a challenge for the European Union. And it has required the other 27 member states to respond to the challenge. But after all, there was a treaty provision for dealing with the country to leave the European Union. Nobody anticipated it would be used, but the provision was there. Clearly, the situation involving COVID and Ukraine are of a completely different magnitude. And then, depending on the nature of a crisis, well, what is the appropriate response? And I think in the case of events that clearly are crises, meaning they require an urgent response, they are severe shocks to the system, then of course there tends to be a centralization of authority. But not only that, and not necessarily that, but I think that procedures have to improve, and procedures that already exist have to be used and improved. And very often the procedural response to the crisis is more than adequate and does not necessarily require a change or a centralization of authority. Thank you.
Olivier?
Maybe just a short answer on your question, Michaela, to compare the van der Leyen and the Juncker Commission. It was certainly easier for Juncker to play the role of president for three reasons. Because if we consider the Commission as an agency, he insisted very much on the evidence-based policies, the role of Timmermans, the role of Selmayr. And so in a way, he agreed with the idea that the Commission would be very much an expert body. And considering the Commission as an agent of the European Council, it was also easy for him because he had such a good relationship with all the leaders and was part of the European Council for so long. And considering the Commission then as a government, it was easier for Juncker because he was a Spitzenkandidaten, he was elected quite easily, and he was able to say, my Commission would be political. So the conclusion we can have about that is that maybe there is a need to clarify the Spitzenkandidaten procedure, not to turn the Commission in a government, but just to make it easier for the President of the European Commission to understand what kind of relation he or she has with the various institutions. Thank you.
Well, thank you. That was a terrific discussion. And I want to thank you and also thank you, the 90 people who are still with us. Thank you for finding the time and to share your expertise and knowledge. I would like to conclude just by announcing the next EPRS event, which will take place tomorrow. It's a book talk with Professor Guénaud. It's about what are the dynamics of the deglobalization. So if you have the time, please do join us tomorrow. And thank you again and have a lovely afternoon.